You already know this story. January 15, 2009. U.S. Airways Flight 1549. Both engines destroyed by bird strike. Captain Chesley Sullenberger lands on the Hudson River. 155 people survive. The world called it a miracle. It was not a miracle. It was the product of 11 minutes of decisions so precisely correct, made under cognitive conditions so far beyond normal human function, that calling it miraculous actually understates what was accomplished. Because a miracle implies randomness, implies divine intervention, implies that the outcome could not have been predicted. What actually happened on Flight 1549 was the opposite of random. Every decision was physically optimal. Every action was aerodynamically correct. Every second of those 11 minutes was used to its maximum possible value. The NTSB investigation ran for 18 months and produced a 292-page report. That report contains findings that were reported in the press as pilot made good decisions and then forgotten. What the report actually documents, in technical language that nobody translated into plain English, is a case study in human performance under constraint that stands as one of the most remarkable documented examples of applied aerodynamics and decision science in the history of aviation. I am going to translate it. Every decision, every second, every piece of physics that made the difference between 155 survivors and a different outcome. By the time this video ends, you will understand exactly why every person on that aircraft was always going to survive, and why that is more extraordinary than the miracle you were told it was.
The bird strike occurred at 3:27:11 p.m. At that exact second, Flight 1549 was at 2,818 feet altitude, climbing through the departure corridor from LaGuardia Airport. The Canada geese, a flock of approximately 8 to 10 birds, entered both engines simultaneously. This specific detail matters. A single-engine bird strike is a manageable emergency. Commercial aircraft are certified to fly on one engine. The procedure is trained. The outcome is almost always safe. A simultaneous dual-engine failure from bird ingestion has happened fewer than a dozen times in the history of commercial jet aviation. At 2,818 feet, climbing away from LaGuardia, the aircraft had approximately 208 seconds of useful altitude before it would contact the ground or water, assuming Sullenberger did nothing. He did not assume nothing. In the first 3 seconds after the bird strike, before either engine had fully wound down, Sullenberger had already assessed the situation, confirmed it was not recoverable, and begun calculating options. This is documented in the CVR. His first transmission to ATC at 3:27:32, 21 seconds after impact, was not a request for help. It was a declaration of fact. Hit birds, we've lost thrust on both engines, we're turning back towards LaGuardia. 21 seconds. Both engines ingested birds. Dual thrust loss confirmed. Situation assessed. First course of action decided. ATC informed. The cognitive performance required to process an entirely novel emergency, one this specific pilot had never trained for in 30 years of flying, in 21 seconds, is something that cognitive scientists who have studied the CVR data have described as operating at the extreme boundary of documented human information processing speed under acute stress.
At 3:27:36, 4 seconds after his first transmission, Sullenberger made the most important aerodynamic decision of the entire sequence. He did not try to restart the engines. He pitched the nose down. This single action, pitching the nose of a powerless commercial aircraft downward at 2,800 feet over New York City, is the decision that made survival physically possible. Here is the aerodynamics. An Airbus A320 without engine power is a glider. Its glide ratio, the distance it travels forward for every foot of altitude it loses, is approximately 17:1. At 2,818 feet altitude, with a 17:1 glide ratio, The maximum theoretical gliding range of the aircraft at that moment was approximately 9 nautical miles. LaGuardia's nearest runway was 1.5 nautical miles away. Teterboro Airport in New Jersey was approximately 9 nautical miles away, right at the edge of the glide envelope. The Hudson River was 1 nautical mile away. All 3 options were within the aerodynamic range of the gliding aircraft. But here is what the glide ratio number does not capture. A glide ratio of 17:1 is only achievable at the optimal glide speed, the specific airspeed at which the aircraft achieves maximum lift-to-drag ratio. Too fast, excess drag reduces the range. Too slow, the aircraft approaches stall and the glide ratio collapses. With no engine power, no thrust to recover from a slow speed, a stall at low altitude means unrecoverable impact. Sullenberger had to maintain the optimal glide speed precisely, without power to correct errors, while simultaneously evaluating 3 landing options, communicating with ATC, managing the cockpit, and preparing for a water landing that no commercial aircraft crew had ever successfully executed in a wide-body jet. He maintained optimal glide speed within 4 knots for the entire 208-second descent. 4 knots for 3.5 minutes in a powerless commercial jet over New York City.
At 3:29:00, Sullenberger told his first officer, "We're going to be in the Hudson." The decision was made. What followed, the preparation for water ditching, is the least understood and most physically critical phase of the entire sequence. Water ditching a commercial aircraft is not the same as landing on a runway. Water is incompressible. At impact speeds above approximately 150 knots, water behaves like concrete. The aircraft structure fails catastrophically. Nobody survives. The target impact speed for a survivable water ditching is approximately 125 to 145 knots, the minimum speed at which the aircraft can maintain controlled flight and flare before touchdown. Below 125 knots on an A320, without engine power, the aircraft will stall. Between 125 and 145 knots, controlled touchdown is possible. Above 145 knots, the structural loads on impact exceed survivable limits for the fuselage and passenger floor. Sullenberger touched down at approximately 130 knots, precisely within the survivable envelope. The flare, the nose-up rotation before touchdown that arrests the descent rate, was executed at the correct height with the correct pitch angle. The aircraft struck the water at a descent rate of approximately 11 feet per second, slightly above the 7 feet per second that is the certification standard for normal landings, but within the structural limit for emergency landing conditions. The wings were level. The fuselage was aligned with the water surface. If the wings had been uneven at impact, one float, one dig, the aircraft would have cartwheeled. Nobody survives a cartwheel ditching. The wings were level. The A320's billy was designed with structural frames specifically to distribute water impact loads. The rear pressure bulkhead, the structural element at the back of the pressurized cabin, held intact at impact. If it had failed, the cabin would have flooded at a rate incompatible with passenger evacuation. It held. 155 people were sitting on top of that water in an intact aircraft because of a series of physical events whose probability, individually achievable only by design, collectively required execution at an accuracy that bordered on physically impossible. The NTSB investigation identified one finding that was almost completely unreported in the media coverage. In its simulation analysis, the NTSB had experienced pilots attempt to return to LaGuardia from the same position, using the same aircraft, the same conditions, the same altitude, in a high-fidelity flight simulator. The first time they ran the simulation, with experienced crews given immediate knowledge that they should try to return, several crews made it to the runway threshold. Most did not. Then the NTSB changed one parameter. They gave the simulated crews a delay to represent the time a real crew would need to assess the situation before deciding to return. With a delay of 35 seconds, the time the NTSB estimated represented a realistic decision time, no simulated crew successfully reached LaGuardia. Every attempt ended in impact. The Hudson River was not Sullenberger's second choice or his third choice. It was the only option that was physically achievable given the time required to make a decision. And Sullenberger chose it without simulation data, without the 18-month analysis, without the benefit of knowing what we know now, based on 40 years of accumulated aeronautical experience, processed in real time at a speed that no simulation has been able to fully replicate. The NTSB's final conclusion on Sullenberger's performance, stated in technical language, in a document almost nobody read, was that his airspeed management, trajectory calculation, and touchdown execution represented performance at the upper boundary of human capability for the specific scenario encountered. Upper boundary of human capability. That is what the investigators who spent 18 months analyzing every second of the flight concluded. Not a miracle. The maximum achievable human performance, applied precisely to a physical problem with an exact solution that only one person in the aircraft was capable of computing. That is not miraculous. That is the most profound form of human excellence aviation has ever documented. Follow for more about the physics, the decisions, and the human performance hiding inside the aviation stories you thought you already knew.